The pounding on my front door that morning wasn't just loud, it felt like the opening shot of a war I never asked for. When I pulled it open, there stood two police officers, their cruisers idling at the curb like a warning. And behind them, arms crossed and lips curled into that venomous smirk, was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. Her accusation, that I was illegally denying neighbors access to the pool sitting 50 feet behind me. Except here's the truth, that pool wasn't theirs. It wasn't the HOA's. It was my family's legacy, built by my grandfather with his own hands decades before a single HOA bylaw ever existed. Every tile carried his sweat. Every ripple carried my father's memory. And now a clipboard-wielding tyrant thought she could rewrite history with a phone call to the cops. What Karen didn't know was that by knocking on my door, she hadn't just started a fight over water, she had awakened a storm over legacy law and fraud. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is there. I want to know who's in this fight with me. When I tell people this whole mess started with a pool, they usually laugh. A pool sounds harmless, almost trivial, like some summertime luxury no one should fight over. But when that pool has been in your family for 3 generations, when it's soaked in the sweat of your grandfather, the quiet labor of your father, and the memories of your own childhood, well then it's not just water. It's legacy carved into stone and concrete. And when someone like Karen tries to snatch that away under the thin veil of HOA authority, you realize quickly that a pool can become a battlefield. My name is Daniel Hart. A year before this all started, I walked away from Houston after nearly burning myself out, managing projects in the energy sector. 12-hour shifts, endless meetings, and a phone that never stopped buzzing, it chewed me up. When my father passed, I inherited Hartstead Ranch, tucked into the rolling hills outside San Marcos, Texas. I thought I was coming back for peace. Instead, I came home to a war I didn't even know was brewing. The heart of Hartstead wasn't the house, the barn, or even the pecan grove. It was the pool my grandfather dug by hand in the summer of 1964. Back then, he wasn't some wealthy rancher. He was a bricklayer, a stubborn man who spent his days building walls and chimneys for other people. But one blistering July morning, he decided his own family deserved something permanent, something joyful. Neighbors thought he'd lost his mind. A pool out here in the middle of ranchland, they scoffed. But my grandfather just laughed, lit another cigarette, and kept digging with a shovel until his palms blistered. He mixed every wheelbarrow of concrete himself, laid every single sky blue tile with his calloused hands. When he finished months later, that pool wasn't just a body of water. It was a statement that even a working man's sweat could create something beautiful, something lasting. Some of my earliest memories are tethered to that place. I can still smell the mesquite smoke from summer barbecues, hear my cousins screaming with laughter as we cannonballed off the diving board, feel the cool water wrap around me on nights so hot the cicadas never stopped buzzing. And when I was older, I'd float on my back staring at the Milky Way, stretching across a sky so clear it felt endless. That pool was more than recreation. It was my family's fingerprint pressed into the land. My father kept it alive after Grandpa passed. He never modernized it, never added fountains or fancy decking like you see in magazines. He just cleaned it, patched, cracked tiles, and oiled the diving board hinges every spring. He used to tell me, "Daniel, this pool isn't just water. It's a promise. Don't let anyone take that away." When I returned after his funeral, I found the pool neglected but not dead. Algae coated the bottom, the fence sagged in places, but the bones were strong. Bringing it back to life wasn't work, it was therapy. I scrubbed tiles until my knuckles ached, replaced the warped wood on the deck, and even sanded the diving board until it gleamed like the summers of my childhood. By spring, the water sparkled again, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. And that's when she arrived. Karen Whitfield, newly crowned vice president of the Cedar Glen HOA, strutted into my life with her oversized sunglasses and her clipboard, the weapon of choice for people who mistake paperwork for power. She lived 2 streets over in a beige stucco house that looked like every other HOA-approved box on the block. I barely knew her name when the first notice appeared in my mailbox. "Dear resident." It began in that condescending tone HOAs seem to perfect. "It has come to our attention that the community pool on your property has been restricted from resident use. As the governing body responsible for shared amenities, we must remind you that all common facilities fall under HOA jurisdiction. You are hereby ordered to unlock and make available the pool for community members no later than Friday." I read it 3 times each word, more ridiculous than the last. Community pool. That pool had been built nearly 30 years before Cedar Glen subdivision even existed. My grandfather's deed clearly marked it as part of Hartstead Ranch. Yet here was Karen acting as though her clipboard was the Constitution. At first I laughed. I crumpled the letter and tossed it in the recycling, convinced it was just a misunderstanding. That was my first mistake, underestimating just how far Karen was willing to push. 2 days later, I was skimming leaves off the surface when a silver SUV crunched up my gravel driveway. Out stepped Karen herself, heels clicking against the stones like she owned the place. She didn't even hesitate, just marched right up to my gate with that syrupy smile. "Mr. Hart," she called, flipping through her clipboard. "We need to discuss the pool." I set down the skimmer, trying to keep my tone civil. "Morning. What about it?" "You've received our notice," she said smoothly. "The pool is a community amenity. Residents are beginning to ask why it hasn't been made accessible. As HOA vice president, it's my job to ensure compliance." Compliance. That word alone made my blood pressure tick up a notch. I took a deep breath. "Karen, this pool isn't community property. My grandfather built it in 1964. It's private, always has been." She gave a laugh, so fake it practically squeaked. "Oh, I think you're mistaken. Our maps show this parcel within HOA boundaries, which means the pool belongs to the association." I nearly burst out laughing. Their maps, I'd seen those flimsy plats before, HOA lines that stretched wherever it was convenient. Meanwhile, my deed stamped, signed, and filed with the county told the real story. "Those maps are wrong," I said flatly. "This pool is mine. End of discussion." Her smile thinned into something sharper. "If you refuse, you'll face daily fines, possibly even a lien. I'd hate to see your property tied up in court because of a simple misunderstanding." There it was, the threat. A trick I'd seen 100 times in corporate boardrooms: wrap intimidation in polite words and hope the other guy folds. But I wasn't about to fold to a woman who thought a clipboard gave her crown authority. "I think we're done here," I said, turning back toward the water. Her heels clicked closer. "The HOA takes non-compliance very seriously, Mr. Hart. If you won't cooperate, we'll escalate. Trust me, you don't want this to get ugly." I paused at the edge of the pool, sunlight rippling across the water my grandfather once poured under a brutal Texas Sunday. I looked back at her and let my voice drop calm and low. "Karen, you have no idea how ugly this is about to get for you." Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard, retreated to her SUV, and sped off in a cloud of dust. The next morning, there it was, a bright orange violation notice taped to my gate. Failure to comply with community pool access requirements. Fines accruing at $500 per day until resolved. That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just bluffing. This wasn't about a pool. This was about power, and she was about to find out she had picked the wrong man and the wrong legacy to mess with. The orange notice flapped against my gate like a flag of war. I pulled it down, smoothed the paper against my palm, and read the words again just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Failure to comply, fines accruing at $500 per day until resolved. I let out a dry laugh. $500 a day? For my own pool. It was so absurd it almost felt like a prank. But Karen wasn't joking. She had declared war, and she was bringing the full weight of her clipboard army to bear. That evening I called Ray, my neighbor, and one of the oldest ranchers still left in Cedar Glen. He'd lived there long before the subdivision sprouted up like weeds, back when the land was still pastures and pecan groves. He chuckled when I told him. "Karen thinks she owns your pool," he said, voice gravelly from years of cigars and country air. "Boy, that pool was splashing water long before she was bossing around lawn heights. Your grandfather poured that thing when I was just a teenager." Hearing him say, it lit a fire in me. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't being stubborn. I was standing on truth, and the truth had deep roots in this land. 2 days later, Karen came back. Not alone this time. She brought 2 other board members, both dressed in the kind of pastel polos and khaki pants that scream HOA royalty. They stood outside my gate, whispering and pointing like they were surveying a crime scene. Karen waved her clipboard like a conductor's baton before shouting through the fence. "Mr. Hart, this is your final chance to comply voluntarily. The board has voted unanimously. The pool is officially designated as a community amenity under Cedar Glen bylaws." I stepped onto the deck, leaned against the railing, and looked down at them. "Funny," I said, keeping my voice cool because my deed says otherwise. "Want to see it?" Her lips curled. "Your paperwork is irrelevant. This property lies within the subdivision boundaries." I raised an eyebrow. "Irrelevant. Last I checked, county records trump whatever doodles you keep on your maps." One of the men shifted uncomfortably, but Karen doubled down. "You're risking far more than fines. If you continue resisting, we'll initiate lien proceedings against your property. I don't think you understand how serious this is." I couldn't help but laugh. "No, Karen. I don't think you understand how serious I am. This pool isn't up for debate. You can tape 1,000 notices to my gate, and I'll use every single one as kindling for my barbecue pit." Her face reddened. She scribbled something furious on her clipboard before storming off, her khaki-clad entourage scurrying behind like ducklings. The very next morning, another notice appeared, this one stamped in red ink. The fines had already accrued to $1,000. I tore it down and tossed it onto the growing pile on my kitchen counter. If Karen thought I was going to blink first, she had no idea who she was dealing with. But she wasn't finished. That Friday, I came home from a supply run to find something new bolted directly onto my fence. A shiny metal sign that read, "Cedar Glen Community Pool Rules. Hours, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. No glass containers. No diving. HOA permit required." My jaw nearly hit the gravel. They hadn't just claimed the pool, they had branded it. As if on cue, a young couple from 2 streets over wandered up holding hands and looking confused. "So, are we allowed to swim now?" the husband asked sheepishly. Karen told us the HOA finally opened the pool. I clenched my teeth, forcing calm. "No," I said evenly. "This pool has never belonged to the HOA. They're lying to you." The wife frowned. "But we pay fees for it." Karen said it covers maintenance. There it was, the heart of the scam. The HOA had been collecting pool fees for years, funneling money into their coffers while pretending this backyard oasis was theirs. I went inside and came back with an old black and white photo. My grandfather stood beside the freshly built pool, in 1964 cigarette tucked behind his ear, my father grinning on the diving board as a teenager. I held it up. This was taken almost 30 years before Cedar Glen HOA even existed. "You've been misled." The couple's eyes widened. They muttered apologies and shuffled away, clearly shaken. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a power grab. Karen wasn't trying to open access for neighbors out of goodwill. This was a scheme, a con, wrapped in HOA stationery. And if residents started questioning where their money had really gone, Karen's empire of rules and fines might crumble faster than she realized. Later that night, I sat on the porch, staring at the water, reflecting the moonlight. I thought of my grandfather, of the sweat that soaked into this concrete, of my father patching tiles year after year, and I made a promise right then and there. If Karen wanted to fight for this pool, I'd give her a fight she'd never forget. I wouldn't just defend my legacy, I'd expose her lies for the whole neighborhood to see. I didn't know yet that Karen's little pool crusade was tied to something much bigger, something involving glossy brochures, developers with slick smiles, and a plan worth millions. But I'd soon find out. And when I did, I realized this wasn't just about keeping neighbors out of my backyard. It was about stopping an empire built on fraud. By the time the third notice showed up, this one stamped with bold red letters screaming, "Final warning," I had lost track of how many times Karen's clipboard army had tried to intimidate me. The stack of papers on my kitchen counter looked like a bureaucratic bonfire waiting to happen. Still, she wasn't slowing down. If anything, she was escalating. Saturday morning, I was raking pecan leaves out of the shallow end when I heard the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't even have to look up. Karen's silver SUV glinted in the sun like a chrome spear. She climbed out in crisp slacks, oversized sunglasses, and that ridiculous clipboard tucked under her arm like it was a sheriff's badge. But she wasn't alone. 2 more board members, different ones this time, trailed behind her. One was a stout man with a receding hairline and a polo shirt stretched across his gut. The other, a thin woman with a perpetually sour expression, carried a camera slung around her neck. Karen marched forward with the air of someone about to give a sermon. "Mr. Hart," she announced loudly, so even the pecan trees might hear, "you are in direct violation of Cedar Glen HOA regulations. The board is here to document your continued refusal to comply." I leaned on my rake, sweat dripping down my neck, and met her gaze. "Morning, Karen. You must be lost. This isn't Cedar Glen property, it's Hartstead Ranch." Her lips pursed. "That's your opinion." I barked out a laugh. "No, Karen, that's county records." She motioned to the woman with the camera. "Take photos. Document the pool, the fence, everything. We'll need evidence for when we file the lien." The woman raised the camera, but before she could snap a shot, I stepped forward and held out my phone. "Funny thing about trespassing," I said, tapping record. "It's illegal. And last I checked, documenting private property without permission falls into harassment. Smile for the sheriff's office." The camera woman froze. The stout man shifted nervously. "But Karen," she doubled down. "Go ahead, Daniel. Call them. The law will side with us. This pool has been used by residents for years, and we will not allow one selfish man to deny his community." I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my voice. Karen, you're bluffing. You know it, and deep down your little board knows it too. This pool was built in 1964, 26 years before Cedar Glen HOA even existed. I've got the deed, the tax records, even newspaper clippings. What do you have? A clipboard and a couple of frightened sidekicks? The stout man's eyes darted to Karen, doubt creeping across his face. The woman lowered her camera. But Karen, God bless her stubbornness, plastered on a smug smile. Fine, she said coolly. Then consider this your last chance. Unlock the gate, allow resident access, or we'll escalate. Trust me, Daniel, you don't want us escalating. And with that, she spun on her heel, her entourage shuffling after her. The SUV door slammed. Gravel spat as she drove off. I dropped the rake, exhaling hard. My hands trembled not from fear, but from rage. Every word out of Karen's mouth dripped with entitlement, with arrogance. And I knew deep in my bones she wasn't bluffing about escalation. The following Monday, I found out exactly what she meant. It started with 3 sharp bangs on my front door. The sound rattled the old wood like a battering ram. I opened it half, expecting another orange notice taped to the glass. Instead, 2 uniformed police officers stood on my porch, their cruisers idling at the curb. And behind them, arms crossed, lips curled in that smug smile, stood Karen. Mr. Hart, one officer, began, voice steady but professional. We've received a complaint from the Cedar Glen Homeowners Association. They allege you're unlawfully restricting resident access to the community pool located on your property. I almost laughed. Community pool. There it was again, that absurd phrase. Karen loved to sling around like gospel. Officers, I said carefully, with all due respect, that pool is not community property. It was built by my grandfather in 1964, long before Cedar Glen was even a blueprint. It sits squarely inside Hartstead Ranch boundaries. It's private. Always has been. Karen immediately interjected. That's not true. Our maps clearly show the parcel falls under HOA jurisdiction. Residents have been denied their rightful use of a shared amenity. The officers exchanged a look. One shifted uncomfortably. The other pulled out a notepad. Sir, do you have documentation of ownership? Yes, I said firmly. Deed survey maps, tax records, the works. Every single piece of paper proves the pool belongs to my family. Karen scoffed, flipping open her clipboard. He's lying. The HOA has managed that pool for years. Just ask any resident. We've collected fees for its upkeep. That last part was a mistake. Both officers' heads snapped toward her. Fees, one asked. You've been collecting fees for a facility you can't prove you own. For the first time, Karen's confidence faltered. Her sunglasses couldn't hide the flash of panic in her eyes. But she quickly recovered. It's common practice. We ensure community integrity. He's the one disrupting harmony. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the backyard. You're welcome to see for yourselves, officers. Walk the property line. Look at where it sits. Then tell me if this looks like a shared amenity or a private ranch pool. The officers hesitated, then followed me down the gravel path. Karen trailed behind heels, clicking against the stones. When we rounded the corner, the pool shimmered in the sun, framed by pecan trees, and wrapped in a wooden fence that had stood for decades. One officer let out a low whistle. Doesn't look like any HOA pool I've ever seen. No community parking, no gate access, no signage, just a private pool. Karen's face darkened. Appearances can be deceiving. The HOA has authority regardless of what it looks like. I pulled out my phone. Officers, I'll provide you copies of my deed and property survey. If Miss Whitfield continues trespassing or attempting to enforce fraudulent claims, I'll be filing harassment reports. That got their attention. The notepad came out again. The older officer cleared his throat. All right. We'll document this as a civil dispute for now. But Miss Whitfield, unless you can provide legal ownership documents, I suggest you refrain from calling us over private property matters. Karen sputtered, her composure cracking. You don't understand. He can't just lock out residents. This pool has always been part of our community events. Then produce proof. The officer cut in flatly. Silence. Karen's jaw tightened, but she had nothing. Minutes later, the cruisers rolled away, leaving Karen fuming by her SUV. She turned on me, her voice dripping venom. You may have fooled them today, Daniel, but this isn't over. We'll escalate. You'll regret standing in the way of progress. I watched her peel out gravel spraying under her tires, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what I was up against. Karen wasn't just waving fines around. She was willing to weaponize the police, twist authority, and drag my family's legacy into a war built on lies. But instead of fear, I felt clarity. Because in that moment I knew two things. One, Karen had just overplayed her hand, and two, she had no idea how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. The morning after Karen's stunt with the police, I woke up to find yet another bright orange violation notice plastered across my gate. The words practically glowed under the Texas sun: failure to comply, daily fines now, $750. My blood boiled. It hadn't even been 24 hours since two uniformed officers had told her to back off, and here she was doubling down like nothing had happened. I yanked the paper free, crumpled it into a ball, and hurled it into the growing pile on my kitchen counter. The counter looked less like a place for coffee mugs and more like evidence storage. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just nuisance paper. This was ammunition. Every notice, every bogus fine, every false claim could be the very rope Karen was using to hang herself. But she wasn't satisfied with paperwork. No, Karen had something flashier in mind. That Friday, I came home from the feed store and stopped dead in my tracks. Bolted right onto my wooden fence was a brand new, gleaming metal sign. Not some cheap printout this time. This thing looked professional, expensive, official. It read, Cedar Glen, Community Pool Rules Hours. 10 a.m., 8 p.m., no diving, no glass, containers HOA permit required. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. They hadn't just claimed authority over my pool, they had branded it like a cattle thief trying to pass stolen property as their own. As I stood fuming, two neighbors wandered up, a young couple from the other side of the subdivision. They looked at me sheepishly, the husband scratching the back of his neck. Hey, Daniel, he asked cautiously. So, are we allowed to use the pool now? Karen said the HOA finally got things straightened out. I forced myself to breathe. No. This pool has never belonged to the HOA. They're lying to you. The wife frowned. But we've been paying fees for it. Karen said the money went to maintenance. I almost laughed at the bitter irony. There it was, the heart of the scam. Karen and her clipboard cronies hadn't just been waving notices around, they'd been collecting cash. My neighbors were footing the bill for a lie, and no one had bothered to question it until now. I disappeared inside for a moment and came back with an old family photo. In it, my grandfather stood proudly beside the freshly built pool in 1964, a cigarette tucked behind his ear. On the diving board, my father grinned like the teenage daredevil he was. I held it up. This was taken almost 30 years before Cedar Glen HOA even existed. That sign on my fence, it's fraud. You've been misled. The couple stared at the photo, eyes wide. They muttered apologies and hurried off, but their shaken expressions told me something important. A crack had formed in Karen's carefully painted facade. And cracks have a way of spreading. The very next day, Ray came by carrying a shoebox full of old clippings. Figured you could use these, he said, setting it on my kitchen table. Inside were yellowed newspaper articles from the 60 seconds and 70 seconds. One headline read, Local family builds pool on ranch property, neighbors invited to swim. The photo beneath it showed my grandfather standing proudly, a garden hose in one hand and a stubborn grin on his face. Proof, Ray said simply, long before Karen, long before her HOA, this is yours. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just proof. It was history preserved in brittle paper and fading ink. That night, as I sifted through the clippings under the kitchen light, I noticed something else. Alongside the articles were flyers. Glossy, modern flyers, clearly not from Ray's shoebox. My pulse quickened as I read the bold title across the top. Cedar Glen Phase 2, Luxury Expansion. The mock-ups on the flyer made my stomach turn. Tennis courts, a clubhouse, manicured lawns, and front and center a swimming pool. Not just any pool. My pool. Same outline, same fence line, even the pecan trees in the background. They hadn't even bothered to change the details. They had photoshopped my backyard into their marketing material. Ray jabbed a finger at it. Look familiar, they're mailing these all over. Investors are sniffing around. Guess who's funding it, folks, with deep pockets? I sank into a chair, the paper crumpling in my fist. It wasn't about neighborhood access. It wasn't about residents wanting to swim on hot days. Karen was laying the groundwork for a land grab. She wasn't just bullying me, she was selling my family's legacy to developers who were already writing checks. By the following week, things escalated further. I found 3 more violation notices, each more ridiculous than the last. Unapproved fencing, obstructing community access, failure to maintain pool to HOA aesthetic standards, unauthorized gatherings near pool facility. The last one nearly made me choke on my coffee. Unauthorized gatherings meant me and Ray sitting on the deck drinking iced tea. Then came the cherry on top. A certified letter claiming the HOA intended to pursue lien action if I didn't comply. My father's words echoed in my mind, "Don't let anyone take this away." I stared out at the pool under the evening sky, the surface shimmering under a half moon, and I knew I couldn't keep playing defense. If I wanted to protect this legacy, I had to flip the script. So I picked up the phone. Emma Porter was an old college friend, sharp as a whip and tougher than steel. Back then, she could dismantle a professor's argument with nothing but a stack of case law and a stubborn streak a mile wide. These days, she was one of the most respected environmental attorneys in Texas. When I explained what was happening, she didn't even let me finish. "Let me get this straight," she said, her voice clipped with disbelief. "Your grandfather built that pool decades before Cedar Glen even existed, and now the HOA is not only claiming it, but collecting fees. Daniel, that's not just overreach, that's fraud." "Exactly," I said. "Good," she replied, "because fraud is something judges love to hammer. Start gathering everything, deeds, surveys, photos, tax records. I'll drive down this weekend, and when I do, we'll put this to bed." I hung up the phone, a surge of relief mixing with adrenaline. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had a weapon sharper than Karen's clipboard. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the pool ripple under the stars, I realized something important. Karen had escalated, yes. She had called the police, taped notices, even branded my fence. But in doing so, she had handed me the perfect stage to expose her. Because bullies only win when no one pushes back, and I was about to push harder than Karen Whitfield had ever imagined. By the time Emma pulled into my driveway that Saturday morning, Hartstead Ranch looked less like a quiet family property and more like a war room. The dining table was buried under stacks of documents, my grandfather's deed survey maps yellowed at the edges, tax receipts spanning 5 decades, and Ray's shoebox of brittle newspaper clippings. Every violation notice Karen had ever taped to my gate was spread out in neat rows, orange and red, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to her fraud. Emma stepped out of her car in boots, and a blazer her auburn hair pulled into a no-nonsense ponytail. She surveyed the pile of paperwork and let out a low whistle. "Well," she said, "Karen really did you a favor. She's been building our evidence file for us." I laughed bitterly. "If she keeps at it, I'll have enough for a whole law school library." Emma didn't waste time. She flipped through the notices, her brow furrowing deeper with each line. Daily fines, lien threats, unauthorized gatherings. She glanced up at me. "Daniel, this isn't just intimidation. This is systematic harassment. And paired with those flyers, it crosses into outright fraud." I handed her one of the glossy brochures Ray had found in his mailbox. She studied the photo of my pool, my grandfather's pool plastered into the Cedar Glen Phase 2 luxury expansion mock-up. Her lips tightened. "They actually photoshopped your property into their development pitch. That's not sloppy, that's calculated." Ray, leaning in the doorway with a mug of coffee, chuckled grimly. "Told you it was bigger than a couple of lawn citations." Emma laid the flyer flat on the table, tapping it with her finger. "If they've been collecting resident fees for maintenance on this pool, and at the same time marketing it as part of an expansion they don't own, that's misrepresentation on multiple levels. Civil court at minimum. Maybe even criminal, depending on how deep the money trail goes." For the first time in weeks, I felt my anger cooling into focus. Karen's arrogance had blinded her. She thought a clipboard and a few notices would scare me into compliance. But what she didn't realize was that every false claim, every fee, every glossy flyer was becoming another nail in the coffin she was building for herself. Emma leaned back, folding her arms. "Here's what we do. We gather ironclad proof, deed-certified plats, tax receipts, historical evidence. Then we tie it to their fraudulent claims and the money trail. You'll walk into court not as a homeowner complaining about harassment, but as the victim of a coordinated fraud scheme. Judges love clarity." Ray chuckled. "Nothing says clarity like a headline, 'HOA scams neighbors with pool they don't own.'" Emma smiled thinly. "Exactly. And Daniel, you won't just be defending your property. You'll be exposing a con that's been bleeding your neighbors dry." That night, after Emma had gone through the files with the precision of a surgeon, I sat on the porch with Ray. The pool shimmered under the moonlight, calm as glass. But beneath that stillness, I could feel the storm brewing. Ray sipped his coffee. "Your granddad once told me, if you stand still long enough, the truth always rises. He'd be proud you're standing your ground." I nodded slowly. Karen wanted to make this about rules, but she just made it about law, and I don't lose when it comes to law. Monday morning, Emma and I drove to the county records office. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, barely looked up when Emma rattled off her request. Certified plats from 1,960 to 1,990 for parcels adjoining Cedar Glen subdivision, especially Hartstead Ranch. The clerk disappeared into the back and returned half an hour later with a thick folder. Emma spread the plats across a table, scanning them like a chess master. Then she jabbed her finger on a line. Here. Cedar Glen's boundary stops a quarter-mile short of your fence line. Hartstead Ranch isn't just outside their control, it's explicitly excluded. She slid the map toward me, her eyes gleaming. Daniel, this isn't a gray area. This is black and white. The HOA has zero jurisdiction over your property. And if they've been charging residents fees based on these lies, that's textbook fraud. The clerk, overhearing, raised her brows. You mean they've been collecting dues for something outside their boundaries? That's a problem. A big one. By the time we left, Emma had certified copies tucked neatly into her briefcase. This, she said, is our sword. Karen's been bluffing with a dull butter knife. Now we've got steel. Back at the ranch, I found a fresh notice taped to my gate, this one threatening legal action if I didn't restore community access. I peeled it off, added it to the pile, and snapped a photo. Each notice was becoming less of a threat and more of a confession. That evening, Emma spread our growing arsenal across the dining table again. She arranged the deeds, plats, tax records, photos, and flyers like puzzle pieces falling into place. Then she smiled. We're not just going to defend you, Daniel. We're going to expose them. I leaned back, the weight of weeks of anger finally settling into something sharper. Determination. Karen thinks she's playing chess. But she doesn't realize I grew up in boardrooms where billion-dollar deals hinged on who had the better paper trail. And trust me, her clipboard doesn't stand a chance. Emma closed her briefcase with a decisive snap. Good, because next week we're not waiting for her to escalate. We'll take the fight straight to her. I walked her to her car, the evening air buzzing with cicadas. Behind me, the pool rippled quietly under the pecan trees, as if daring Karen to try again. And I knew she would. Because bullies don't back down when challenged. They double down. And when Karen doubled down, she wouldn't just be playing into my hands. She'd be digging her own grave. The very next morning, proof of that came delivered in glossy ink. Every mailbox in Cedar Glen received a new flyer. This one bigger, bolder, shinier. Across the top, Cedar Glen expansion, a future of luxury living. Smiling families splashed in a pool, my pool. My pecan trees in the background, my fence framing the scene. But this time, the flyer went further. Phase 2 amenities brought to you by Cedar Glen, HOA, and Wilkins Property Group. At the bottom in fine print, projected completion summer 2026. I clenched the flyer so tight my knuckles whitened. Wilkins Property Group wasn't just some HOA contractor. They were one of the most aggressive developers in the state. If Karen had tied my pool to their plans, this wasn't just about HOA overreach anymore. This was about money. Millions. Emma studied the flyer, her eyes narrowing. She's not freelancing this. She's building a pipeline for investors. And if we don't stop her now, they'll bulldoze truth under marketing spin. Ray spat into the dirt. Developers, parasites with pocket squares. I looked at the pool, its water shimmering under the morning Sunday. My grandfather's sweat was in that concrete. My father's hands patched those tiles. My childhood laughter still echoed off those pecan branches. And now Karen was selling it like it was a bullet point on a real estate brochure. That was the moment I stopped thinking of myself as just defending a pool. I was defending a legacy. And legacies don't bow to fraud. By the time those glossy flyers had circulated through every mailbox in Cedar Glen, whispers were spreading faster than wildfire. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to began stopping me at the diner and the hardware store, even while I was pumping gas. Some were curious. Others were angry. And a few, those who had been writing checks for pool maintenance fees for years, looked betrayed. One woman, a mother of 3 who lived 2 streets over, cornered me outside the post office. Her voice trembled with embarrassment. Daniel, Karen told us this pool was always part of Cedar Glen. I told my kids they'd be swimming there by summer. We've been paying dues. Are you saying? Yes, I cut in gently but firmly. You've been lied to. Her face fell. We trusted her. And there it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. If neighbors started doubting Karen, the whole facade would crumble. But doubt alone wouldn't topple her empire. I needed proof. Ironclad, undeniable, county-stamped proof. That's where Emma came in. She was relentless. By midweek, she'd transformed my dining table into what looked like a courtroom exhibit. Deeds, certified plats, tax records, family photos, newspaper clippings, flyers. She cataloged each piece with surgical precision, and then, like fate itself, decided to give me an ally. Ray walked in, carrying another box. His hands, rough from decades of ranch work, trembled slightly as he set it down. "Found these in my attic," he said. "Figured you could use 'em." Inside were yellowed photographs and brittle clippings. One picture stopped me, cold my grandfather standing shirtless by the half-finished pool shovel in hand, concrete dust smeared across his chest. Beside him, a teenage Ray grinned from ear to ear, his feet dangling in the unfinished basin. "That was the summer of '64, Ray said softly. "Your granddad mixed that concrete himself. We worked until sundown most nights. Nobody from Cedar Glen was around then because Cedar Glen didn't exist. That pool was your family's blood long before Karen learned to spell HOA. Emma's eyes lit up. "This is perfect. Independent witnesses, historical evidence, photographs. Judges eat this stuff up. It's not just documentation, it's context. It tells a story Karen can't erase." For the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel: hope. That Friday, Emma insisted we drive back to the county records office. She wanted certified copies of every plat, every deed, every zoning document tied to Hartstead Ranch. The clerk recognized us, immediately raising her eyebrows as Emma rattled off requests like a general calling orders. Within an hour we had everything. And there, in bold black ink on an official county plat from 1990, was the line that made my stomach flip. "Cedar Glen HOA boundary ends 1/4 mile east of Hartstead Ranch." Emma tapped the page with a manicured nail. "Daniel, this isn't a suggestion. It's definitive. Karen's claims aren't just wrong, they're fabricated." She tucked the map into her briefcase, her smile sharp as a blade. "They've been bluffing. And worse, they've been charging residents for something they never owned. That's not overreach. That's fraud, misrepresentation, and misuse of funds." Ray spat on the courthouse steps as we walked out. "I reckon Karen doesn't know it yet, but she's standing knee-deep in quicksand." Emma smirked. "And we're holding the rope." Over the weekend, my ranch turned into something between a library and a war bunker. Emma spread papers across every flat surface, organizing evidence into neat categories. Ray brought more stories, more context, more clippings from the local paper's archives. And me, I sat there in awe, realizing just how much history was stacked against Karen. But as strong as our case was becoming, Emma wasn't satisfied. "We need more than paper," she said one night, her eyes blazing under the lamplight. "We need to show intent. Not just that they lied, but that they profited from it." Her words proved prophetic. The next morning, Ray showed up with another piece of the puzzle, a flyer he'd pulled out of his neighbor's mailbox. This one wasn't just for residents. It was slicker printed on glossy cardstock aimed at investors. Across the top, Wilkins Property Group in partnership with Cedar Glen HOA. And there it was again, my pool, center stage in their pitch for a world-class community recreation center. Tennis courts, a fitness club, manicured landscaping, all anchored by the existing community pool. I slammed my fist against the table so hard the coffee mugs rattled. Existing community pool, that's my backyard. Emma scanned the fine print, her jaw tightening. They're not just lying to residents anymore, they're lying to investors. This isn't arrogance, it's a scheme. She flipped the flyer around, tapping the bottom line. Projected capital investment $3.2 million. Investor buy-in already underway. I felt my chest tighten. Karen wasn't just angling for free swim privileges. She was setting up to sell my family's legacy to developers with dollar signs in their eyes. Emma leaned forward, her voice low and razor sharp. "Daniel, this changes everything. This isn't just civil harassment. This is commercial fraud. And if we play it right, we can expose it before a judge, before the county, before every resident who's been paying into this scam." Ray chuckled darkly. "Never thought I'd see the day where a pool turned into $1 million battleground." I looked out the window at the pool shimmering under the sun, the pecan trees swaying gently in the breeze. It was so still, so ordinary, and yet somehow the center of a storm bigger than I ever imagined. "This isn't just about me anymore," I said quietly. "This is about every neighbor who's been conned, every family who wrote a check thinking they were paying for something real. If Karen wants a war, she's got one." Emma closed her briefcase with a snap. "Good, because our next move isn't defense, it's offense." By Monday, the rumors had exploded. Neighbors whispered about investor money, about Karen's glossy flyers, about the sudden spike in HOA dues. At the grocery store, I overheard two men muttering angrily by the produce aisle. "Paid $1,500 last year for pool upkeep. My kids have never even set foot in the place." "You think she's pocketing it?" Wouldn't be the first time. The tide was turning. And as I stood on my porch that evening, Emma beside me, Ray leaning on the fence, I realized something. Karen thought she was tightening her grip with every notice, every threat, every flyer. But in reality, she was just handing me the tools to dismantle her scheme piece by piece. Emma's voice cut through the quiet. When we're done, Daniel, she won't just lose this fight. She'll lose everything, her authority, her credibility, and maybe even her freedom. I nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the pool. Good. Because this isn't just about a pool anymore. This is about legacy. And legacy doesn't bow to fraud. The Cedar Glen Community Center had never been so full. Folding chairs scraped against the tile as residents packed shoulder-to-shoulder murmurs, echoing off the low ceiling. Normally, HOA meetings were sleepy affairs, half a dozen bored homeowners listening to Karen drone about mailbox paint colors. But tonight was a spectacle. And at the center of it stood Karen, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter, her voice dripping with the authority she thought she still had. Phase 2 of Cedar Glen, she announced with theatrical flair, will bring unprecedented amenities to our community. A modern clubhouse, tennis courts, and of course the jewel of our neighborhood, the community pool. The projector behind her flickered to life, showing glossy renderings. Children splashed in water that I knew all too well. My pool, my pecan trees, my fence line. For a moment the room buzzed with impressed murmurs. But then a hand shot up in the middle row. An older man with silver hair and a sharp tone asked, "Where exactly is this pool, Karen? Looks an awful lot like the one on Mr. Hart's ranch." Karen didn't flinch. "It is adjacent to Mr. Hart's parcel," she said smoothly. "As you all know, this facility has always been a community amenity. Under Phase 2, we will finally modernize it for the benefit of everyone." I stood. The room went quiet, every eye turning toward me. My heart pounded, but my voice came out steady, cutting like glass. That facility is Hartstead Ranch property. It has never belonged to this HOA. And selling it as part of your expansion plan isn't modernization, it's fraud. Gasps rippled across the room. Karen's face drained of color, but before she could regain her footing, Emma rose beside me, her briefcase clicking open. She laid certified deeds, plats, and newspaper clippings across the back table, like a lawyer in court. "Exhibit A," she said firmly, her voice carrying through the stunned room. "The original deed to Hartstead Ranch 1964, recorded with the county notarized indisputable. Exhibit B, county plats from 1990, clearly excluding Hartstead Ranch from Cedar Glen's boundaries. Exhibit C, historical photographs and newspaper articles documenting the pool's construction decades before Cedar Glen existed." She held up one of Ray's clippings, my grandfather beaming beside the half-finished pool. "This isn't hearsay. This is history." The crowd erupted into murmurs. Some residents craned their necks, others whispered furiously. A man in the back shouted, "So all those pool fees we've been paying, what were they for?" Another woman stood, her face red with anger. "Karen, I paid nearly $5,000 in so-called pool maintenance since moving here. You told us it was necessary." Karen's voice cracked as she tried to regain control. "These accusations are baseless. The HOA has always acted in good faith." Emma cut her off like a whip. "Good faith, misrepresenting private property to residents and investors, is not good faith. It's fraud." The room buzzed with outrage, now neighbors turning on one another, voices rising in anger. Richard Wilkins, the slick developer behind the glossy brochures, stood in the corner tugging nervously at his tie. His confidence melted as residents demanded answers. That night marked the tipping point. Karen had strutted in, expecting applause for her grand vision. Instead, she walked out, pale, flustered, and surrounded by neighbors whispering words like lawsuit and refunds. Days later, the courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old paper. The clerk's monotone voice echoed as she called the case. Cedar Glen Homeowners Association versus Daniel Hart. Karen sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, her blazer ironed to perfection, Richard Wilkins lurking just behind her. Their attorney, a sharp-jawed man named Holloway, looked smug as he rifled through a briefcase stuffed with papers. Emma and I sat at the defense table, our evidence stacked neatly, each piece marked and cataloged. My palms were damp, but Emma radiated calm like a general before battle. Holloway spoke first, his voice oily smooth. "Your Honor, the HOA simply seeks to enforce community standards. Mr. Hart has unlawfully restricted access to what has long been a community amenity. Residents have historically enjoyed use of the pool, and he now denies them without justification." Karen nodded vigorously, her smug smile flashing again. Emma rose slowly, adjusting her blazer. "Your Honor, this case is not about community standards. It is about property rights, misrepresentation, and fraud. The pool in question was built by Mr. Hart's family in 1964, decades before Cedar Glen HOA existed. The HOA has no legal claim whatsoever. She slid the original deed across the bench. Exhibit A, Hartstead Ranch, including the pool, recorded with the county. Private property. Exhibit B, certified plats showing Cedar Glen boundaries ending a quarter-mile short of Hartstead Ranch. Exhibit C, historical newspaper clippings documenting construction of the pool. Exhibit D, tax records proving continuous payment by the Hart family for over 50 years. The judge studied the deed, adjusting his glasses, his brow furrowed. This appears to be notarized, filed, and crystal clear. Mr. Holloway, do you have a deed proving HOA ownership? Holloway hesitated, his smirk faltering. Not precisely a deed, Your Honor, but long-term community use establishes precedent. The judge cut him off sharply. Precedent does not trump recorded deeds. Emma pressed her advantage. She lifted one of the glossy investor brochures. Exhibit E, marketing materials from Cedar Glen HOA and Wilkins Property Group, in which they photoshopped Mr. Hart's private pool into their Phase 2 expansion. This demonstrates not only misrepresentation to residents, but false advertising to investors. Fraud, plain and simple. The gallery erupted, angry whispers, gasps, even shouts. Several residents sat wide-eyed, clutching their copies of the brochure. One muttered loudly, "So we've been paying for nothing." Karen shifted in her seat, her knuckles white on the clipboard she refused to put down. Richard tugged at his collar, sweat glistening under the fluorescent lights. Emma delivered the final blow with her voice steady as stone. "Your Honor, the HOA has knowingly lied to residents, collected fees for a facility it never owned, and attempted to sell that facility to developers under false pretenses. This is not a misunderstanding, it is fraud." The judge leaned back, his gaze like steel. The court finds that Hartstead Ranch, including the pool, is private property. The Cedar Glen HOA has no authority over it. Effective immediately, all violation notices, fines, and threats of lien are null and void. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for review of potential fraud and misrepresentation charges. Karen's face drained of color. Richard slumped in his seat. Holloway fumbled with his papers, the fight gone from his eyes. As the gavel cracked, I felt a weight lift from my chest. This wasn't just victory. It was vindication for my grandfather's sweat, my father's stewardship, and my family's legacy. But Emma leaned close, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Don't get too comfortable, Daniel. Fraud investigations take time, and desperate people, they make desperate moves." I followed her gaze across the courtroom. Karen was glaring at me, clipboard trembling in her hands, her eyes burning with venom. She wasn't finished, and neither was I. The weeks after the gavel fell were the strangest mix of relief and tension I've ever felt. On one hand, the judge's ruling had cleared the air. Hartstead Ranch was mine, the pool was private, and every violation notice Karen taped to my gate was nothing more than kindling for the fireplace. On the other hand, Emma was right, this wasn't over. Fraud investigations moved slowly, and in that limbo, Karen grew more desperate. Word of the verdict spread fast. Sarah Lynn, a sharp local reporter, ran the headline across the county paper: HOA, misrepresented private pool judge, refers case for fraud review. She even quoted the sheriff's report, where officers had documented that Karen provided no legal documentation of ownership. For once, it wasn't my word against hers, it was written in black and white. The fallout in Cedar Glen was volcanic. At the next HOA meeting, residents packed the community hall copies of the article, waving in their hands like torches. Frank, an older gentleman who'd lived there for a decade, stood up first. His voice trembled with rage. "I've paid over $8,000 in so-called pool fees since I moved here. Karen, where is that money?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. A young mother in the back shouted, "I told my kids it was our community pool. You made me lie to them." Karen banged her clipboard against the podium, trying to restore order. Everyone calmed down. These accusations are being blown out of proportion. The HOA acted in good faith? "Good faith," someone yelled. "You called the cops on a man for swimming in his own pool?" The crowd roared with fury. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw Karen falter. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling around that clipboard like it was the last piece of power she had left. And then came the audit. Letters arrived in official county envelopes, not HOA stationery. The treasurer's office had opened a formal investigation into Cedar Glen's finances. Every check written, every line item declared as pool maintenance, was suddenly under a microscope. The numbers that came back painted a picture uglier than I'd imagined. Tens of thousands of dollars funneled into vague consulting fees, community engagement, and board development. Hotel stays billed as training sessions. A Florida retreat listed as essential expenses. The headline, Sarah ran a week later, was brutal. Audit reveals HOA misused funds, false pool fees, luxury retreats. Residents exploded. At the next meeting, the shouting started before Karen even entered the room. Refunds, one man screamed. Where's our money? A woman demanded. Karen's face flushed crimson as she clutched her clipboard, but every excuse she offered was drowned out by outrage. Even Richard Wilkins wasn't spared. Residents cornered him in the back, waving investor brochures in his face. You lied to us. You lied to everyone, one man growled. The pressure spilled beyond HOA meetings. Social media lit up with memes mocking Karen's bogus community pool rules sign. Neighbors who once parroted her talking points now laughed at her clipboard authority. The local TV station even ran a segment. They filmed me on my porch, the pool shimmering in the background, while I said calmly, "This was never about denying neighbors joy. It was about truth. Property rights matter. No one, not even an HOA, can take what they don't own." The clip went viral across the county. My phone buzzed with messages, some thanking me, others sharing their own HOA horror stories. What had started as one woman's crusade had cracked open something larger, a collective resentment against years of petty tyranny. Within weeks, half the HOA board resigned, unwilling to stand beside Karen as her empire crumbled. At the next meeting, she entered the hall, late head held high but eyes darting nervously. The moment she opened her mouth, residents drowned her out with boos. One man slammed the sheriff's report onto the podium. "This is official. You lied to law enforcement and you humiliated all of us." Karen's voice wavered as she tried to respond, but the room had turned against her. The queen of clipboards now looked like what she truly was, a fraud caught in her own web. The county prosecutor didn't let the matter rest. Subpoenas flew. Emails were seized. Every HOA record from the past decade was dragged into daylight. Richard's investors, furious at being conned, filed lawsuits of their own. One particularly angry developer told the press, "We were promised exclusive rights to amenities the HOA never owned." This was deception, plain and simple. By the end of that summer, Cedar Glen HOA was in shambles. Karen was no longer leading meetings. She was consulting with her lawyer, dodging reporters outside the courthouse. Richard's house sat empty, blinds drawn, whispers swirling about him, fleeing back to Florida. And the clipboard that once gave Karen her swagger, it became a punchline photoshopped into memes, captioned "Rules for a pool you don't own." Through it all, the pool remained still, unbothered, reflecting the pecan branches above, as if mocking the chaos. I decided it was time to reclaim it, not just for myself, but for the meaning it once held. With Emma's help, I established the Hartstead Pool Trust. Not a gimmick, not an HOA trick, but a framework that kept the pool firmly in my family's hands, while allowing respectful, limited access to neighbors. We carved a wooden sign with my grandfather's initials and placed it at the gate alongside a plaque in honor of Samuel Hart, who built not just a pool but a legacy of respect. When we opened it, there were no glossy flyers or empty promises, just families arriving cautiously, asking permission, cleaning up after themselves. Kids splashed in the shallow end while their parents lounged on picnic blankets. An elderly couple dipped their toes in the water, laughing like teenagers again. For the first time in years, the place felt alive in the right way, not through entitlement, not through coercion, but through respect. Ray leaned against the fence beside me, watching it all. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said softly. "Not just because you defended this place, but because you shared it on your terms." And he was right. I hadn't fought this war just to slam the gates shut forever. I'd fought so the truth could stand, so no clipboard tyrant could twist it again. Sometimes I sit on the diving board at night, my feet dangling in the cool water, staring up at the same stars I used to count as a boy. The laughter of neighbors fades into the stillness, and I realize something simple: victory isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, just the ripple of water under the moonlight, a legacy preserved, and the knowledge that lies don't last, but truth does. Karen tried to steal my pool. Instead, she gave me a louder voice, a stronger community, and a legacy no HOA could ever touch. This battle taught me something I'll carry for the rest of my life: you can't bully people out of what's rightfully theirs. Paperwork can intimidate, titles can impress, and lies can spread, but in the end, truth has more weight than any clipboard. My grandfather's sweat lived in that concrete, my father's care in every patched tile, and no committee could rewrite that history. So if you're listening now, let this be your reminder: stand your ground, protect your legacy, don't let false authority steal what's yours. And now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA or a neighbor who pushed too far? Did someone try to take what wasn't theirs? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if this fight made you cheer, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Because trust me, There are plenty more HOA battles waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss the next one.